You guys don't mind.
Okay, folks,
Yeah.
we're gonna call things back to order. Let me bang the gavel just to get your attention. Russ?
Thanks, Ron. So again, please welcome Bruce McKeown. Glad to have you back, Bruce. Thank you for this. So tell us how those oranges get from California to New York.
Well, I will. First of all, thank you to the Division 8 for having me back. I've given several presentations to you guys, and I've always been warmly received. So thank you for that. Thank you for Russell for arranging it, and for Ron and Fred to be part of it too. This is a story. It's a fictional story, but it's based 100% on factual data. I've singled out one particular refrigerator car. We're going to follow it all the way from the orange groves in Southern California till it gets to a grocery store in New York. And it's made up and based on factual information such as timetables, railroad shipping records, fruit grower records, things like that. But it's all combined into one story. And I'm not the guy that wrote the story. A guy named Richard Hendrickson did. And I'm taking his work and I'm incorporating it and presenting to you as this presentation. I've known him for a bunch of years, except for the last 10, because unfortunately he passed away in 2014. He fell off a ladder of all things. So if you guys climb ladders, I still do. Got to be careful. Anyway, pilot, another connection here. He and I flew airplanes, not together. But he put this material together. He did the research. He looked up the data. He checked with the railroads and he found the information to create this story that we're going to talk about. And also part of it came from a railroad magazine from 1947 that actually described this process also. Richard has a PhD in English linguistics. He was a college professor, among other things. He was always a good friend for knowledge. If I had a question about something Santa Fe, I'd shoot it off to Richard in an email. I need to get a phone call back or a stack of literature or reference material scanned into a PDF that I could look at in the computer. He was really good and capable, knowledgeable individual about Santa Fe. So we're going to take a look at what he wrote here and figure out how we get some oranges from Southern California to a lady's table in Brooklyn, New York. I don't think I did that.
Don't be alarmed, Bruce.
Okay. Before to give the capability for fresh fruits and vegetables across the country, unless you lived near where they were produced or grown, you probably didn't have access to them. It's maybe through canning processes. You go to the A&P and buy a can of peaches or something like that. You couldn't get a fresh peach if you didn't live near Georgia and wherever else peaches were grown. So refrigeration, railroad refrigerator cars came along and expanded that capability. All right, seems to have died, Ron.
Because of the interruption. Okay, go on again, Bruce. Short work now.
Okay, Santa Fe created SFRD, Santa Fe Refrigerator Department. This focus totally was on shipment of refrigerated goods. And even the cars had separate reporting marks. They weren't labeled ATSF, they were labeled SFRD to distinguish them as being owned, controlled, and operated by the refrigerator department. In the late 40s, the Santa Fe had over 15,000 refrigerated cars. And I'm sure other organizations like PFE and WFE had big numbers also. Imagine 15,000 refrigerator cars run in blocks of refrigerated car trains. They made good money on it, and in turn, they provided the best service they possibly could to the shippers and receivers for the citrus goods. They could get it across the country really fast. Now, compared to today's standards, it didn't look that fast. Go back to 1947, they could get from the groves in California to the East Coast in under 2 weeks, considering things like 100-mile crew days, steam locomotive water stops, crew changes, icing refrigerator cars. All that had to be factored in, yet it could still make it across country that fast. So I picked an SFRD refrigerator car. It really is a real car. It may not have been in this narrative, but it was a real car. It was built as a 23 class car in the 20s as a wooded car. In 1936, the Santa Fe was in a big upgrading program. They took wood reefers, made up steel reefers, added some other upgrades like fans to them, things like that to help carry the cargo there. That's what it would have looked like back in 1947. Okay. We got to start prior to day one before we actually start moving this fruit here. Car comes back from a route east, carried fruits and vegetables someplace east, sent back, ready to go back into service again. We'll call it day -3. San Bernardino is the big West Coast hub for shipments leaving the Southern California area. It arrives back, it's inspected, it's cleaned, it's checked, and marked ready for service again, and it's stored in a ready track or in a yard with ready tracks on it there. Meanwhile, we'll go down to Escondido near Oceanside, and the Santa Fe agent down there, he's collecting data from all the growers and shippers saying how many refrigerator cars you need tomorrow, the next day, etc. And he communicates back to San Bernardino and says, the Sunkist grower needs 10 refrigerator cars tomorrow afternoon. And all that goes into the big system and they figure it out. So they'll make up a train, leave San Bernardino with all the ready refrigerator cars needed down the coast. And it runs on what's called the surf line. That was the way it got down to the southern Southwest California coast area there. Leave San Bernardino with all the outbound empty reefers and any other cars that were headed south all the way to San Diego. 1947, primarily still ski mops. Day -1 sets out the cars in Oceanside, and the local Oceanside, or the Oceanside local freight train now gets ready, going to take all the empties down to the grower sheds and pick up all the loads that the growers loaded since the previous day when they sent another load of empties down there. So in the afternoon, remember, it left San Bernardino late at night. By late afternoon, the next day, that car has been spotted at a grower ready to be loaded. In this case, the story goes, the research showed it was a Sunkist grower, so could be anybody though. All right, day 1. Now we start the clock. Let's see how fast we can get this refrigerator across the country. Co-op producer there loads the car with crates of fruit and they dump some ice in. A 300-pound block of ice is roughly 40 gallons, 7.5 pounds per gallon. But they start getting the car cold. So they'll maintain the temperature, will eventually maintain temperature and keep the fruit cold on the rest of its trip. Okay, local freight train. The next day picks up all the loads, drops off new empties as requested by the growers, and assembles them back in Oceanside. And in the evening, that one train from San Bernardino that brought all the empties down, now it's making the return trip the next day, picking up all the traffic, bringing it back up to San Bernardino to prepare it for shipment across the country. One unique thing Santa Fe had, when you get to the B yard, which was their refrigerated car yard in San Bernardino, they had a pre-cooler plant, and they would plug these big, huge hoses in and shove refrigerated air through the refrigerator car and take out what they call the field heat. Because those 300-pound blocks of ice in the bunkers at the end, they were ready to help chill, but the cargo was still pretty warm. So this was another step that Santa Fe took just to ensure that the cargo would be as fresh as possible when it gets to its destination. Okay, the train is assembled, the reefers are loaded up with ice to start the cross-country trip. And then they bring the engines out of the roundhouse, and they had a big maintenance facility right there at San Bernardino, a lot of strong locomotives for the hill climb out of San Bernardino, which takes you up through what's known as Cajon Pass and the highest elevation of a place called Summit. This particular train, 3 210-2s, 1 leading and 2 pushing in the back. And they talk about leaving town there with everybody wide open. I'm going to show you in another slide or two what we're talking about there. This train, 80 or 68 cars, works out to about 2,720 tons. Doesn't sound like a lot today, but we're going back a long time. We're going back 75 plus years when all this is going on. Okay, Keenbrook, one of the little towns along the way up towards Summit. There's water available there. And the crews in the train, and let's get there a little, pause just a second. Talk about these helpers in water. Talked about leaving the depot in San Bernardino wide open. Generally, depending on the train, depending on the style of helper, they would tell the lead engineer, would brief the other engineers, says, I want you guys to run wide open at the back of the train. Everything you got out of your engine, give it to me. And they would control the speed up front. If they felt the train was going a little slower, the lead engineer would add a little power to it. If it was starting to go a little fast, the lead engineer would reduce it. So most of the work seems that it was done by the helpers, with the lead engine kind of controlling the whole show. San Bernardino to Summit, about 25 miles and 2,700 feet of elevation. That works out to a little over a 2% average grade. I did the math on that just to be sure. Okay. 210-2s, depending on the class, either had 15 or 20,000 gallon tenders, water. Now they still had the oil in there too to burn the fire, but they could carry 15 or 20,000 gallons of water. That's a lot of water. That's a swimming pool sometimes. Okay. Keenbrook, the place I mentioned there, is just past halfway up the grade. And the engineers in the train, not only the lead engineer, the fireman, and the firemen in the pusher engines, or the helpers in the back, as they passed the place called DeVore, which was at the 10-mile spot, they would look at their water gauges and say, do I have enough to make it all the way to Summit, where the next water stop is? So I've traveled 10 miles, I've got 15 to go. Will I make it with the water I got? Remember, we either had 15 or 20,000 gallons of water to start. If they figured they needed water, whistle signals, no radios, just whistle signals from the helpers to the lead locomotive, and they would stop. This particular narrative, all three wanted water. So the lead engineer pulled up next to the water tower, filled the tender, they shoved the train forward, and then the two helpers get their water. So that's what's going on, trying to get this train up the hill. Fred, sir.
Bruce, so to clarify, how many miles had they actually traveled before they might need this first water stop?
10. They make their decision passing DeVore, which is 10 miles out of Bernardino. The water is available at the 13-mile mark, which is just halfway from 25 miles. Uses a lot of water. I'm going to show you a couple of pictures here. I think this is really neat. Santa Fe, based on the load of the train, the power available from the helpers, generally would put the helpers in front of the caboose. Caboose underframes generally weren't as strong as like boxcars and tank cars and stuff like that. So here's a picture. Here's our two 210-2 helpers. There's the caboose behind them there, shove it at the rear of the train, going up towards Summit. I even found one in Cole, back from that time frame there. Two helpers at the back, pushing the train up towards Summit. And I found another picture just searching around, and I felt I had to throw it in here for you. This one impressed me is how much energy and how much work helper steam locomotives were doing. Going up the same grade, going up from San Bernardino up towards Summit at Cajon Pass there. How about that? Yeah. Wide open, burning a rich, fuel-rich fire because of the black smoke and everything there. Guy named Donald Duke, he was a famous railroad photographer. He's the guy that took this picture. And I can just imagine how noisy, how much shaking the earth was doing when those two locomotives went by him right there. Anyway, little side discussion about helpers. All right, gets to the top of Summit. The two helpers are discharged. They can run light back to San Bernardino for their next assignment. And the train starts to run downgrade to the east. And eventually it gets down to at Victorville. And they take the lead steam locomotive off and they put a set of 4 FTs up front. In this case, it was 132 lead A, B, C. One of the A units was called the lead, then a B unit, and the other A unit was called the C unit. And early on with FTs, they used to run them in blocks. They didn't switch units around that often. They would tend to keep a 4-unit FT together. Santa Fe did anyway. All right, running downgrade, headed towards the desert. Early morning, remember we left San Bernardino in the evening. Early morning hours up at Needles, stop. Put ice in the cars. And perhaps along the way, the 100-mile crew day, anything like that, all had to be taken into consideration for the movement of this train. So here we are, we're getting ice in the train on the way east. New crew, head out of town, and we start working our way through Arizona. We got out of California, we're headed to Arizona, heading through Arizona now.
How long did it take them to fill a car with ice?
Probably a few minutes, and it may depend on did they have mechanical or manual icing. At the next picture when they're icing, well, I can back up. I think it's this one here. Yeah, that's a mechanical icer. The blocks come down a track on a conveyor, goes up the little lift there, and they dump it down in there. Before that, they would still have this little track that the ice blocks came out on, but there'd be guys with these picks, and they would yank it off there and drop it down into the bunkers on the cars. I have a feeling from what I just pulled way back out of memory here from someplace, it's probably a few minutes per car. And if here, we got 60 some cars here, you're gonna spend 2.5, 3 hours icing your train. Mechanical refrigeration solved that problem.
Excellent question.
Yeah.
Okay, so where were we? Okay, another set of FTs takes over. Santa Fe, and I'm sure a lot of other railroads too, they would tend to keep certain types of locomotives operating in certain districts or regions. Not like today, you might have a bunch of big SDs leaving San Bernardino and connect through Chicago to the Conrail and go all the way east and end up in Philadelphia or someplace. Same locomotive makes the whole trip. They didn't used to do that back then. Okay, new FTs. Across the desert in the evening, it's not so hot, so they can skip one ice stop here. This is October, so if we were doing this in July, we'd probably have to stop and re-ice the train one more time right there. Okay. Richard Hendrickson, member, English linguistics, PhD. Some of the words in here are his, some are mine. Gallop came and went as the sun set in the west. I didn't write that. Richard Hendrickson wrote that. Anyway, another stop, check the cars mechanically, check the temperatures, ice them if necessary. You know, still making progress, but not super fast progress based on all these other needs. Yes, sir.
What day are we now?
We are in day 4.
Okay.
Remember, the clock started day 1 in Oceanside. I'm gonna put that in perspective here, a couple slides ahead. So we're literally, when they started loading that car with the orange crates, that was day 1. It took them a whole day to get it to San Bernardino, another day to ice it, make up the train, et cetera, et cetera. So we're on day 4 right now. All righty, day 5, click. FTs come off, put a big 210-4 up there. High-speed freight locomotive built for flat territory and fast hauling. Not unusual to see them go 50 to 60 miles an hour with a train back there, a big 210-4. We're still in, we're out of Arizona, we're in New Mexico now, Vaughn and Clovis, places like that. They break up the train here. Some of the stuff going to the southeast, like in Texas and that area, were taken out of the train, some of the cars with destinations down there. And oddly enough, and I don't know why, but this is, remember, factual information. They put some stock cars up at the head end. They're going to go to Kansas City, but as long as the train's going that way and it has the capacity to haul it, that's what they did. Didn't slow down the refrigerator train, or refrigerator car progress, but they had the capability to haul extra cargo with it. Okay, Amarillo, water stop, crew change. You know, these happened a lot of times with steam up there. Plains division, 74-inch drivers. That was that 210-4 we just talked about there. It gets into Oklahoma, and again, every time it needs to, the train is inspected, it's iced, etc. Another thing Santa Fe used to do is they tell the shippers, we know markets fluctuate, and we know we're not doing this overnight. This isn't going on Monday and you're going to get it Tuesday. We're talking about a little over a week here to do all this. The shippers had the option to shift the destination of the car if they needed to. And the example that came out of this story was that the prices fluctuate here. So the car originally may have been billed to Pittsburgh, and they said, market isn't so good in Pittsburgh, let's shift it to another market. And let's say they chose Detroit. Santa Fe let them do that 3 times without charge while the car is en route. Now, if the car got all the way to Chicago and they decided they wanted it back in St. Louis, well, you know, get out your checkbook, shipper, you know, it's going to cost you extra. So they would let them change the destination of the car 3 times while it's en route.
This is before computers.
Oh, 1947. Here's the computer right here. And a hand cranked editing machine. I can remember my mom had one of them. Okay, so we're diverting this car as necessary. 484s as diesel came along, and we're still early in the diesel years here. We're just shortly after World War II. Diesel's being produced. They are still manufacturing steam locomotives too, oddly enough. Santa Fe is putting dieselization on their best passenger trains, demotes in essence the 484s that used to haul the big passenger trains, devotes them to freight service. Santa Fe used them to haul freight. Not many railroads did, would take a big driver 484 and haul freight with it. Santa Fe did because they could do it and they could do it well. All right, out of Oklahoma here, we headed up into town, into Kansas. passing through that area. Got to Emporia, Ottawa Junction, then finally Kansas City, the Argentine yard there, huge yard. And they had icing facilities there, they had crew change facilities, they changed locomotives as necessary and take care of the refrigerator car. There's another one of those mechanical icing machines there.
So again, question, what was the time between icings? How many days?
As necessary generally, like,
Yeah.
remember we talked about the cross to Mojave Desert at night,
Yeah.
in October, they didn't need to. If it was daytime, they probably had to stop that train again. I would, without factual information here, I would suspect probably once a day.
Okay.
Just as a guess.
Mm-hmm.
We're getting out of the desert Southwest now, we're up into the central US where the temperatures aren't generally so hot.
Were there drains in the bottom of the?
Yes, there were.
So when the ice
Now we're
melted.
called bunker drains. Another thing, a lot of folks have never learned, and it took me a while to find this information, but I had it a whole bunch of years ago. Sometimes they throw salt in the bunkers too with the ice to get the temperature down a little lower. You know. So you're draining salt water. I had it in a presentation. I haven't given it to you guys, but it was about some modeling I did with Santa Fe refrigerator cars. And it showed older cars like we're representing here that have gone through their life, years and years and years of salt water draining down out of the bunkers. And there were big tubes that came down, they would drain it, it wouldn't fill with water, the water would drain out. And how rusty and corroded and beat up the underframes at the end of these cars became. And those cars were candidates for, and a lot of times they were rebuilt. Take out the whole, from the bolster forward, everything on the underframe came out and they put in a whole new bolster and then underframe system for, you know, the coupler side of the bolster forward. The life of the car through that kind of a maintenance process. And generally that happened either when they upgraded from wood to steel or on the age of the car and how long it had been in service and how deeply corroded. I had a presentation, and I've got it still, I just don't have it today with me here, that shows some of those pictures of what those underframes look like, corroded and beat up and torn up, and what they put in new equipment to extend the life of the car and prolong its use. So yeah, water drains, many times with salt water coming down.
So the crews are required to change every 100 miles, right?
Back then, I think that was pretty much the standard. It was
So
a
there's
100-mile crew day.
So you've taken a day between ice, you're changing crews between the icing, so you've got all those stops. change
And
crews,
water stops.
Water stops. and all that.
Yeah. It wasn't like open the throttle, kick back and, you know, you're busy.
Yeah.
All righty, Rue here. Okay, Argentine, Kansas City. Something bad happened. Stock cars came out. They go to Kansas City stockyards there. They had a big stockyard in Kansas City for a long, long time. In fact, they had a great steakhouse there called the Golden Ox. Some of the refrigerators built southeast, transferred to other railroads there. In this case, we're citing Missouri Pacific. I'm going to take a bunch of them over to St. Louis for us. All right, midnight. Hours go by on all these stops here. They had some locomotives they built special 284s for dashing across Missouri because it was pretty flat. Put that in charge of the train and headed out east again. Ended up crossing Fort Madison, Iowa. That's where they cross into Illinois. Coal burning engine now. This has been oil all the way to get here. They still mine coal in Illinois, believe it or not. Santa Fe took advantage of that. They had coal burning locomotives take it the rest of the way up to Chicago. Another diversion order here says, okay, Detroit prices aren't so good anymore. We're going to try and send it to New York. So that's the second diversion, but it's still within 3 they were allowed. Okay, what's next? Here's my summary slide. We left San Bernardino. We're arriving in Chicago. All right. Left Oceanside on day 2. Left San Bernardino on day 3. That's when I start my stopwatch saying, how fast can I get this refrigerator across the country? We arrive in Chicago on day 7. 4 days from San Bernardino to Chicago. That works out to over 1,690 miles, about 425 miles a day. In 1947, steam locomotives, multiple stops for water, icing, crew changes. You know, they hit the yard in Kansas City. They just didn't run through and buzz in and out. They probably stayed 4 or 5 hours there by the time they inspected the cars for maintenance, iced the cars, new locomotives, et cetera, et cetera. So we're still moving pretty quick, 425 miles a day. All righty, Rue. We got it to Chicago. They have the Indiana Harbor Belt. That was kind of the major switching organization in the Chicago area. Picks up the cars headed further east, takes them across the border into Indiana, and they're ready to give them to the Erie Railroad, which was Santa Fe's partner for getting into the northeast part of the country there. Erie had some fast freight locomotives, and they had a crack train they ran every night. It was NY 98, and it generally was a perishable train. And it would dash east from the southeast Chicago, northwest Indiana area there and take the loads on further east.
In those days, was there any ever use of the Santa Fe trains all the way along like they do
Not
now?
that I'm aware of.
Yeah, I think not, yeah.
Run through stuff and the locomotives run through and
My
stuff like
train.
that is modern day kind of stuff compared to this. Okay, cross Indiana, Ohio, gets to Marion into New York there. All right, got to get it iced again. You know, just because it's October doesn't mean you don't need to refresh the ice in the train. Car inspectors go out there, the oilers and the mechanical guys, they take a look at everything too. Out of there, the Erie picks it up. In this case, they used one of their Pacific locomotives that was dedicated to freight service. We're running on pretty flat territory. We're not climbing mountains like they did out west or anything. So lighter, smaller wheeled locomotives would probably be appropriate here. All right, into the New York and New Jersey area. In Campbell Hall, cars cut out, given to other railroads for dispersion in other different directions other than the main focus of this train here. Boston, for example, they give them to the New Haven, and New Haven would take them up to Boston. Into New Jersey and the Croxton Yard, which seemed to be the hub for the Erie to do a lot of classification of their trains, makeup of trains, breakup of trains in there. We're getting really close to New York now. Here we are, day 10, but remember, 4 days to Chicago. We're about 2 days beyond that now. Switchers break up the trains, start moving them to the various destinations. In this particular case, our car 32670, they're putting on barges and floating them across to Manhattan. That's the way they got cars into the New York City area there. Tugboat takes them across the river up there to the piers on the Manhattan. In this particular case, they had piers 21, 22 were the Erie's piers. Cars arrive there early in the morning. The market opens up. The brokers go looking at stuff. And the guy from Atlantic and Pacific, A&P grocery store, he says, I'll buy that carload of cars. And they do the deal on that. Trucks come down, empty refrigerator car, trucks go all across the New York City metropolitan area, delivering the cargo of fruit to the individual grocery stores. And by now, day 12, that's from leaving Oceanside. Mrs. June Levy goes in there and buys a half a dozen oranges. And out of curiosity, I did some research and looked this up. We're about 49 cents a dozen in 1947. So she bought half a dozen, 24 cents worth of oranges maybe. Now think of the cost it took to move that crate of oranges all the way from Oceanside. Trains, crews, fuel, water, ice, inspections, maintenance, pick anything that the train needed. And they still got them for 49 cents a dozen. Okay. Refrigerator car's empty. That's not the end of its life. Barge takes it back across the river to Croxton Yard. And it was an interesting thing here, and I've known this thing for a long time, but it showed up in this presentation from Richard. Empty refrigerator cars could be used as box cars for clean cargo. Now, you wouldn't load it full of cattle manure and ship it west or something like that. But if you had bulk freight, clean freight, they could use refrigerator cars instead of a box car. So many times these refrigerator cars, if loads were available, had new loads put in them to head back west. Didn't necessarily always have to run empty. That was done quite often too. So there we are. Less than 2 weeks from the orchard. The point I keep focusing on, 4 days from San Bernardino, Chicago. Back then, the super chief ran on a 37.5-hour schedule from Los Angeles to Chicago. Day and a half, basically. Here we've done the same thing with a train that had to stop very often for inspections, for icing, for crew changes, et cetera. 4 days, San Bernardino to Chicago. With what they got available today, they could probably beat that record out of heck. But going back 75 plus years. That's the way it was done. All right. I have, some of you have seen my railroad. I modeled Santa Fe, oddly enough, up a lot. Well, I can tell you what, 1967 is my time frame, and it's desert Southwest. And it's desert Southwest because I found that's the easiest scenery to do. I don't like to do scenery. I'll do mechanical, I'll do woodwork, I'll do wiring, I'll do track and all that stuff. I don't like scenery that much, so that's. I've got a few grades on it, 1967. For nostalgia, I have 2 steam locomotives on my railroad. One is a 484 and one is a 210-2. And I just run them occasionally just because I can. I have a long refrigerator train. I think it's up to 59 cars right now. I like to run long trains. That's why I built my railroad the way it is. And occasionally I'll bring out the steam locomotives and I'll run a freight train, or even I have a bunch of old heavyweight passenger cars for nostalgia. So here we are, 1967. I drug out all my ice bunker refrigerator cars and I put them in a train. I have some mechanicals too. 67, they were starting to show up. Put together a refrigerator train powered by steam locomotives. I've got a 484 up front and a 210-2 in the back pushing. So the first anomaly is steam in 1967. Last steam left the Santa Fe in 1956. So I'm cheating a bit. The other thing is you're going to see mixed constant cars. I have cars from other railroads and other shipping companies. I've got some PFE cars, some WFE, some Burlington. In World War II, the Railway Administration told the railroads, haul everything, no matter whose name is on the side of the car. After that, they kind of got away from that and saying that they tried to run solid blocks of SFRD cars. I have some other railroad cars in here, so you're going to see some of those too. And the third one I was going to say, Barry Christensen, but I understand he's not even online watching this. He's en route Chicago. I'll tell you afterwards, you're going to see some anomalies in how the refrigerator cars look, how they're decorated. I'm 1967, steam 19, whatever, in the video here. Ron, if you would click the video, we can make it happen. The train you're going to see go by is 53 cars. There's the 484 leading uphill. This is about a 1.3% grade. Some of the other foreign lines, so to speak, refrigerator cars. And then we get to the block of the Santa Fe refrigerator cars. And again, I did not put my mechanicals in. This is purely ice bunker cars. Looks a bit, doesn't it? Yeah. It was running smooth. I said, Ron, come on, he does better videos than I do. The glory days before graffiti. Yeah. And there's 210-2 shoving at the rear. All righty. The anomaly on the cars, you'll notice some of the cars had well, actually it was 3-foot square, small Santa Fe circle cross. In 1958, they introduced the big 8-foot diameter circle cross scheme. So on 1967, both of them were still around. If this was purely steam ops back in 1940 or early 50 something, they all would have been the 3-foot diameter square circle crossing. Barry would have caught that in a heartbeat, I'm sure. And if you watch this video someday, Barry, thanks for helping all the time you have with my refrigerator. Why did it start again? All right.
I'm not sure.
Wow.
It's magic. All righty. Well, I thank you.
Great presentation. Thank you,
Bruce.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Bruce. Appreciate it.
By the way, Russ, Stan is requesting some mechanical icing machinery on your ice deck so we can get those refrigerator cars through quicker.
That's right.
Sure. Well,
On to their destination.
tell him right after he gets home to start making it, and we'll make it happen. Huh?
Okay. Folks, that's it for today. Thanks for coming. We'll see you at the picnic.